waiting on me? Or
I can give you an introduction if you want, or you can just start.
okay, great. I wasn't sure if we were waiting still. Hi everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk, The Lessons We Don't Talk About. And before I dive into the talk, first a little bit about me. Some of you may already know me, some of you might have never seen me before, but if you've been in Seattle for a while, you've probably seen some of our games. So my name is Jakub Kasztalski, and I'm the founder and creative director at Unbound Creations. Our indie studio has been around for about 11 years, and we've released 7 commercial titles across PC, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, Itch. I think that about covers it. And we've also been to a number of shows. We've won some awards. We've been selected to some showcases as well, such as here locally. We've been to PAX. We've been to Seattle Indies Expo. If you've gone to those before, you've probably seen our games. So TLDR is kind of been doing it for a while and surviving. So why this talk? I kind of thought about being here and what can I give you, and I think there's already a great wealth of information out there, especially on places like GDC YouTube channel. There's just so many talks about design and postmortems and so many lessons, so many other showcases. So I wanted to stop and think, what can I add to all of this? What are some other lessons that maybe we don't talk about, or maybe ones that don't seem as intuitive as what's already kind of mainstream accepted as good news, as good practices? Which kind of brings me to a little bit of a notice I wanted to give that this is my own experience, my own beliefs, and that doesn't mean they're always going to be the best or they're going to work for everyone. And some of those may be a little bit controversial or not what others would consider best practices. So, take that with a grain of salt. So a little bit about how do I do things at Unbound Creations? How do I release 7 games in 11 years? So a lot of kind of models that I've seen or talks are between being a solo developer or kind of working with a team. And I realized I don't really neatly fall into those categories because I'm kind of a little bit of both. I'm solo dev, but with a team. And what that looks in practice is that I usually will spend some time fucking around with my own prototypes. I think at one point towards the end of burnout pandemic, I had 10 different Unity projects that I just ended up switching between. And then eventually, once I have something that I think I'm liking, and I think okay, this is potential. I could sell this. I can see people wanting to pay money for this. That's when I actually start to scale up. I'll hire more people. I'll bring in artists. I'll bring on extra developers. I'll bring on marketing, and basically go into full production mode. And this kind of a model has certain pros and cons. It does keep my costs lower because the first half of development is basically just me doing my stuff. It gives me more creative control. And it makes it kind of easier and plan and manage the project because by the time I'm actually hiring people, I have a clearer vision of what the project is going to be, what it needs, and I can plan ahead. And the cons are it does take longer because I'm doing it myself. There's more burden on me as well because, again, I'm doing most of that myself in the beginning. And a big pitfall is too that you kind of end up with that model losing the team after because once you finish the project, there's nothing for everyone to work about. So it's kind of okay, I have to go back to the drawing board. And that is something that I've been trying to work on improving myself and ideally getting to a point where I have 2 projects in the pipeline. So we can kind of oscillate as one project is winding down and another one's picking up. And also learning to be a better team lead and also kind of letting go a little bit and letting my people be there for the earlier prototype stage as well. That's something that I'm still learning to do better. So let's jump into some of the lessons that I wanted to share with you. And the first one, I just had the realization a few months ago. I was kind of looking at my bank account, my projections, and I realized that I don't get paid until 3 years after I do the work. And what does that actually mean? It means, using an example from our latest game called Just Grow Things, if you've heard about it, is I spent about 6 months to a year prototyping, kind of getting it to a place where okay, I think this is legs. So there's my bank account is going a little bit lower because I have to live. And then I do the thing where I scale up. I hire extra artists. I think I'm going to go to full production. So that's when my expenses are really skyrocketing because it just keeps going up and up. And especially once we get a launch window, there's marketing spend, there's advertising, there's flying to showcases. So, now I'm spending a lot of money, and then finally the game releases. So it finally, after a year and a half to 2 years, it starts generating revenue. So now my bank account is bouncing back, although I'm still doing a little bit like post-launch support, some patches, some marketing. We're also working on porting it to PlayStation. We're all working some other promotions. And eventually I reach a point of break even. And that's a point where the money that I spent is recouped by the money that the game has made after about 6 months. That doesn't mean I made money. It just means I didn't lose money anymore. So now, after that, any extra money the game makes is my money, kind of. This is the profit that I actually generate. And right now, based on the projections, it'll take about a year from that point where I've basically paid myself a living wage. So it took me about a year and a half to 2 years to make in the game. So if I wanted to pay myself, let's say $50K a year, this is the point where I finally would have made $50K per year for those 2 years that I spent working on the game, which is kind of a wild realization when you think about it. It's like, normally when you do a job, you're just like, okay, you get paid at the end of the month, but I was like, I get paid 3 years later. So then the question is, how am I even alive? How do I do this? And the truth is that I can do this because I have multiple such projects now that are overlapping, and now I'm basically living on an income from like 2 games ago. And it's kind of like building a passive, source of income, so I can keep living myself, but also like investing in the company, in the new projects, into paying people. And how did I do it in the beginning? It took me about 5 to 6 years to actually get to that point, and there were some failures as well on the way. And honestly, just don't quit your day job. So I've been freelancing as a web developer for a long time. I've done some other stuff on the side as well. I've actually done some freelance work on other games as well. And basically, it wasn't until like a few years back when I actually reached that point where I was like, okay, I can actually do this full time and sustain myself, because I built up that kind of momentum. And it's also, Avid, this is very different than if you work with a publisher who gives you funding. So that's a very different model that I personally didn't want to get into. I work with publishers to certain degrees. It's kind of like a value add, like bringing our games to consoles or doing some marketing for us. But this is assuming that you kind of be self-funded and you want to like have full creative control. So going on to the next lesson, working around your limitations. And I think a lot of us start wanting to make games because, hey, I have this cool idea, I want to make it. But that's only really kind of like 1/3 of the question that you should be asking. And for me, it's kind of like the holy trifecta between what I actually want to make, what I have resources to make, and what people are willing to pay for. So what I want to make, it's, everybody has an idea. That's self-explanatory. What I have resources for. So that kind of goes back to the idea of what I have money to pay for and how long can I do this for. So, can I survive the next year or two? Plus how many people I can pay. Like if I want to make a big RPG, I'm probably going to need a lot of developers. I'm going to need writers. I'm going to need artists. That's very different than doing like a platformer, which is, has much smaller necessary resources and shorter timeline. And the third one is also, I think that's often overlooked, is what people are actually willing to pay for. So looking at trends and seeing like, for instance, on Steam, a lot of players love kind of survival crafts, deep strategy games, 4X games. So those are much more profitable genres than a side-scrolling platformer. So you also have to be realistic about how much can I actually generate from this game. And this may feel a little bit daunting to kind of like try to balance all these things, but the way I kind of look at it is it's kind of an elaborate resource management game, because you have all these things you want to keep track of, like what are the current trends, what are my resources, what's the timeline, how much does this game need, what do you actually want to make. And this might not appeal to everyone, but I bet a lot of us play resource management games and enjoy that process. And in a way, it's not that different than planning out your farm and start the valley and trying to kind of grow from this little small plot of land to a bigger like powerhouse of a machine of producing every single crop. Then you also have to track what is the season, what are the prices of the seeds, what do people want at what time, what level I am. And I think kind of approaching that with this kind of a mindset, like, oh no, this is this big scary thing to like, okay, this is a puzzle, this is a challenge. This is a, I just have to find a sweet spot between all those resources. I think makes this problem a bit more approachable and less scary. And to give you some practical examples, right now for the past year since I last released, been kind of working on a few prototypes and kind of evaluating what makes sense. So I'm looking at things like, genre, I mentioned development time / cost, for the different kind of games. Some of them, like, I could probably wrap up in 6 months to a year. Some of them will probably take 2 years. Marketability is, how easy do I think marketing this game is going to be? Like, how interesting is the hook? How unique it is? How saturated the genre is? For like an action adventure game, that's kind of low marketability because there's a lot of games like that. You really have to stand out, and maybe I don't feel like this project has the hook, or maybe I do think that it has a strong hook. Versus something like a horror game, I think it's, again, like horror games do really well on Steam. So like the marketability is a lot higher there. And I think that's not as saturated of a genre. Viral potential, it's kind of similar, but it's more like, if I just release this game on its own and I do anything, what's the chance that this game might do well on its own? So then goes back to the idea of like certain genres do better on certain platforms. So Nintendo Switch loves its colorful, cozy game, family-friendly games. Steam loves its resource management, survival craft games. So those kind of games will do better on certain platforms, even with like no marketing. So I think that it's closely related to marketability, but I think those are two separate points. An audience is another thing. Is it like a casual game for young players? Is it more for like hardcore PC master race kind of a group, or is it family-friendly game? That will also impact how easily can you reach that audience. And then lastly, I also look at like marketing proof. So some of those games I might have submitted showcases, or might have like tweeted GIFs of, and kind of like watching like, how much interest are these early prototypes generating? Are people liking it on like social media? Are we getting exhibited in showcases? So that also helps inform like how much potential that idea has early on before like I invest like 2 years into it. And it's, again, looking at this kind of information and trying to like pick and choose like what makes most sense for me to develop next. And how do you know? Honestly, it's experience is the best teacher, I think. Looking back at when I was starting out, my first game was like overly wordy visual novel. I just finished my master's, so everything was academic. It took me 2 years to make a 30-minute game. I did not know what I was doing. And I think a lot of us starting out don't know what they're doing. And it's just experience. You kind of just have to put the time in. Like, don't be down on yourself. It's a point I'm going to get a little bit more in a second. But I do encourage you to start small, just go through the motions, learn the process, get a game released, learn what it's like to, faff around with the Steam settings, make a press release, even if it's bad, like learn the process, and always keep learning. There's a lot of great resources out there. howtomarketagame.com, game discovery newsletter. I also constantly snoop on competition using SteamDB. I talk with other developers. I mentioned, I kind of look at the current trends, what's popular, what's not. And whatever works now is not going to work tomorrow. So you kind of always have to keep learning. You kind of always have to be checking those things. Which brings me to the next point, that the market always changes. So I mentioned I've been doing this for 11 years. My first game released in 2013. And back then, I got picked up by PC Gamer because I had a written text blog. That's it. Just a dev blog. Like, have you ever followed a dev blog these days? Like a written words and text? Like, that doesn't really work these days anymore. And even press is becoming less and less relevant. Then with my next game, it was all about the YouTubers and also brokering deals with bundles. Like, that gave us a lot of exposure. Then the next game, it was we got a Game Pass deal with Microsoft, and that was kind of like the golden goose, which, if you've been paying attention to the trends, a lot of indie developers are saying is no longer, the payouts aren't as huge anymore. It's harder to get. So that's also kind of going away. Then with my last release, Just Crow Things, Summer Game Fest was the big breaking point. We were part of a few events during Summer Game Fest, and that 1 week of events, we doubled all our Steam wish lists we got in like 10 months before. By the end of second week, we tripled the number. So that one event, Summer Game Fest, was just blew all our other organic marketing out of proportion. We also, TikTok is also where a lot of games are having success. But that's now, and is it still going to be effective this year, next year? Like, again, it's this thing where, like, there's a new kind of like the golden goose, then everybody jumps in it, it gets oversaturated, it loses its impact. So you kind of have to be always thinking ahead. Trends also changed too. Remember when Slay the Spire released, and then every other game was a roguelike deck builder game? Same with Vampire Survivors. I think a year after Vampire Survivors, like half of all the next Steam Fest demos were all like Vampire Survivor clones. So those trends also change. And if you can jump on a trend early on, you can ride that bandwagon. But if you jump too late, you're just going to get buried by that noise. It's, again, the idea of saturation. So what's next? Are games as platform like Roblox, Fortnite? I know there are some game studios that like exclusively make Roblox games. Is free-to-play gacha the next thing? According to Chris Zukowski, who writes the How to Market a Game blog, he's saying the survival crafty likes are what the average Steam user loves, so that's what he encourages. Or maybe we'll see Balatro likes. That's the latest like huge popular game. And I think I was just reading a blog about the there's like like a casino roulette game, I think, that's been going viral, and it's very similar to Balatro. Or maybe there's new genres that we haven't invented yet, like arguably Vampire Survivors or Slay the Spire, like created new genres that weren't as explored before. So maybe there's whole new genres we don't even know yet. That's kind of like the exciting part about being a developer at an early stage of this. Of games as an art medium, we're still inventing the medium, which is, I think, really cool. Going next to the other lesson is all related to the like thinking long term. Think multi-game. It's it's the old saying of it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm assuming if all of you are starting or in the process of making games, you're probably not gonna just be like, I'm gonna make one game and then I'm gonna work for QFC or something. You probably want to be making games for a living, so you're probably gonna make at least 10 games in your lifetime, if not more. So don't think of that one game as like, this is my only chance. I've heard a really good advice how, save your dream game for like the 5th or 6th or 7th game. Like, don't start with your dream game because it's probably going to be terrible and you're not going to know the process and you're going to mess it up. So use that kind of as a learning steps. And I think that, some of the lessons that I personally learned, and I'm going to touch on it later, is I've only learned after the game released. And that also gives you an opportunity to build on your own kind of experience and code base. So, these are 2 games that I released, and the fire in the first one is the same as the fire in the second one. I just developed a fire system that worked really well, so I just kept using it. So as you're releasing games, you're basically building this framework and a code base that you can keep reusing and making each new game easier. The same fire system, I used it in a few other games. And that, I mentioned that I've been spending the past year making 4 different prototypes, and I can do that because I have this whole framework for, handling fire and managing input and sound management and save system that I can basically just plug and play because I developed that over 5 different games before. So it also makes developing each future game easier because you have all this experience, all this code, even all 3 assets that, I bought asset packs that I'm still using now because why not? Which leads me to the next lesson, and we're kind of getting to this slightly controversial territory. I think good enough is good enough. You might have heard of the Pareto principle of 80% of your 80% of your success. Sorry, that was a different rule. We're sorry, I'm gonna skip that point. My bad. So anyway, let me jump to this where, when I started out, I come from a programming background, and we all have different. Some of us are artists, some of us are writers, some of us are programmers. And so, adjust this to yourself. But when I started out, I was like, I'm a programmer. My goal is to write beautiful code. And halfway through working on my first game, I was always the guy who was I was making things, but was never finishing things. I was always tinkering and always implementing features. And I had this epiphany that my goal is not to write beautiful code. My goal is to release games, which is a very different objective. And I think reframing that as a goal, it kind of shaped how I approach my development and working on different features. You probably heard about, don't prematurely optimize or over-engineer things. Often going for the simplest and stupidest solution is enough. Like if it gets the job done and it doesn't, it negatively impact your things in the future, like just go for the stupidest solution. It works. And again, how do you know when it works, when you can get away with cutting corners? Again, I think it's experience. I mentioned like my first game, I spent 2 years on basically a 30-minute visual novel. And it kind of took a while to learn that, like, okay, this is a place where we can cut corners. This is a place, okay, now we need to engineer this properly. We need like a proper framework. So that just takes experience. So again, like don't, go to the just like keep making games, keep releasing games, keep learning, and don't beat yourself over, because I do think that you just kind of have to go for the motions. And to give some specific examples, if you use Unity, you'll be familiar with that, like using game object find or send message to communicate with components. It's risky, it's not efficient, but I know that there are some circumstances where I can get away with it, where it's kind of like this will be called like once every 2 minutes. It's not going to be an issue. But if you call it every single frame, that might become an issue. So kind of knowing the tools for experience helps you decide, when you can get away with like basically bad code, because it cuts down on your development time. It simplifies your project scope, and just, in the words of Todd Howard, it just works. Which brings me to the next lesson. And this is, I think, probably the most controversial of my takes, is carry your lessons onto the next project, not to improve your current one. And I had that moment when I keep bringing my first game where after those 2 painful years, I released it. I got reviews. I got some feedback from press. I saw some YouTubers play it. And there were like a lot of good, like negative feedback I got. And I realized that a lot of those things that people were mentioning, I wouldn't have known until after I released the game. So if I kept iterating on it further, I would be fixing the wrong things and effectively kind of wasting time doing the wrong thing and not actually the thing that the game needed. And it is difficult, I think, lesson, but I think that it's true for most games that, even if you do internal testing, like that only gets you so far. Sometimes you just have to let it out in the world and see how the world reacts to the game for you to actually learn the important lessons. Sometimes you just have to just ship it. And, whatever, if it bombs, it bombs. If it does great, it does great. And you just have to like let it go, let your child go, and, take those lessons onto the next project. In other words, don't be stuck spending 8 years making a game, and by the time you release it, you kind of passed your window and it's too late. Another way to look at it is also about risk mitigation, going up to the idea of like, what is, like your own finances, and also like what, how can you make this a sustainable business? What's kind of like a better model? Spend 6 years making your dream game and hoping that it's going to be the next Stardew Valley and make you millions of dollars, or make 3 games every 2 years and hoping that one of them is pretty well, or maybe 2 of them do pretty well, or maybe 3 of them do pretty well. It's kind of like I feel like every success is like half your hard work, half just pure like random chance. There's like that element of like pulling like a casino lever, and give yourself more chances to pull that casino lever. The more releases you have, the more those chances you get, and again, the more lessons you learn. And if your games do take off, then they become that source of that passive income. If you wait 6 years to release your game, I told you, like, I'm not going to get paid for 3 years. And then if you release your game after 6 years, so add another like 6 years to that. But if you're releasing consistently, then you can start generating income. And with each release, it becomes easier. Assuming you at least doing okay, it becomes easier because you're actually making more money as you go along, rather than banking that, like, I hope that 6-year investment pays off. So how do I get stuff released consistently, like every 1.5 to 2 years? For me, I have a very simple model that I kind of figured out, again, back on my first game. I set a date and I stick to it. After doing that initial prototyping and kind of getting an idea of like, what is this thing? I kind of have a vision for the big project, and that's when I scale up. I hire people, I make a schedule, I make a timeline, and I think, okay, I think this is a reasonable estimate when we can finish that game. And that's
release date then acts like an anchor for me. Once I have that anchor, I can plan everything around it. I can kind of work backwards and be like, this stuff needs to be done by this time. This 3 months before we need to like announce the release date. A month before we need to send the release keys. So we need to have the game in this kind of state and that, blah, blah, blah. If you're doing console, then you also have to be like, it'll probably take a month or two to get for certification. So like we have to get a build ready by then. And, I'm very strict about sticking to those kind of deadlines by just scoping around, moving things, cut features if you have to. Because I do think that like, once you have that, it's hard, but once you have that date, that single anchor, then, everything else, your whole schedule, everything, it just folds neatly into place around it. Psych, no, it doesn't. It's video games. Nothing ever goes according to plan. You'll always have a date. You always have a plan. It'll just halfway through, it'll just explode. But the nice thing is that it's not going to go according to plan. So you can plan for things not going according to the plan. Again, that's okay. I think that's just normal. It's kind of like part of the creative medium. Sometimes you'll just, I had moments where like I had this is going to be MVP killer feature. Then I implement it and it's like, wow, this is terrible. What was I thinking? Sometimes you'll just have a weird bug that suddenly becomes, this is really cool. We should like code it as a proper feature. I think that's just the nature of creative work. Like sometimes it just takes life of its own and you have to be ready for that. And the way I kind of deal with that is just by like adding extra time, like padding and keeping the design flexible and kind of like revisiting and being open to that kind of a change. So here's an example from my timeline on the top is my original timeline at the start of the project. You can see all this nice empty white space that I left there because I knew we're going to need it for something. And we did. The bottom is kind of the final timeline. And you can see that, things just ended up moving around. Things ended up filling in. And I feel like development is a bit like a cat. It'll fill whatever shape you put it into. So, if you have shorter time, you're going to crunch, you're going to cut stuff, you're going to, make it work somehow. If you have more time, you're going to just come up with ideas, you're going to take your time, you're going to polish extra things. So again, having the kind of deadline lets you at least plan around that and kind of like figure out the shape, and then you can kind of fill it as you go along. So continuing for that is, I mentioned evaluating as you go along, just being very sincere about like, okay, we have this much time left with this many features. Can we do this? Should we cut things? Can we simplify things? You have to be willing to kill your darlings. I think every game that I made, there's some stuff that like I just didn't have time to get in because we just didn't have time. And sure, I could make my team crunch, or sure, we could just extend it and I could lose another 6 months of income. But if I want to keep doing this, if I want to keep surviving and making games, I think it's better to just be realistic about, okay, we need to get this done. And, let's just scope it down to what it needs to be, do the best job as we can. And again, take those lessons onto the next project and be smarter next time with the next game. And what I like to do in my process is kind of race to the first playable. And I think there's a lot of similar terms to this kind of, we've probably heard like vertical slice or a prototype or a demo. And it's kind of a little bit in between all of those that I like to do. I kind of like to create as quickly as possible the full experience. And it doesn't just mean like having the core loop to your gameplay. It means everything. A splash screen when you put the game through studio logo, main menu, credits, the end game screen when you finish the game, a post screen, a photo mode, a new game plus, even a very rudimentary, just like have some kind of a flag. It's like, is the game in new game plus or not? And it can be, very, very basic. You can just have literally boxes with letters in them. Like it could be, very prototypical placeholdery. But I try to get to that point as soon as I can where I have the full experience, where someone can boot the game, go for the main menu, go for the level selection screen, play a level, end the level, go back to level selection, play the next level, and then once they beat all the levels, they get like a nice little ending cutscene. They get, and then like you unlock new game plus. And as I mentioned, as you kind of keep releasing games, that also gets easier because you have all this framework built up. Like now, after 11 years, I can do all this stuff in like literally a week because I have all the code for main menu, for setting, for post menu, for photo mode, for my save system. I just keep kind of reusing it. So all those building blocks I've already built up for so many games. And now I can create a whole framework that's spine for a game and make it a complete experience. much more quickly in the beginning. So again, it's releasing games makes it easier as you go along. And I think this has a lot of benefits. It helps you see how everything fits together. Like, does even this model for this game, does it work, or, is there friction here or there? It's kind of like looking at a part of a painting versus the whole like sketch of the whole painting. So I think seeing that sketch kind of lets you see the big picture and envision the whole game better. But it also have a lot of practical benefits. You have a build you can test. You can just send it to someone. You can show it to someone at an event. You can also submit it to publishers. You can submit it to investors. Like that plus event and expos, if you have a playable build, helps a lot because it also gives them like greater confidence in you as yes, I'm capable of creating a full game experience. It also helps you see what's missing. Like, oh crap, maybe we forgot to add the pause menu. Oh, maybe we forgot that we need like art for like this little widget here or something like there. So it helps you also like create a list of like everything you're gonna need, all your assets, maybe something you forgot. Or like I said, maybe you'll see that stuff like, this extra feature actually kind of doesn't like add anything. Like maybe the photo mode doesn't really make sense in our game. Like it just doesn't add anything. So like we can just scrap it. So it helps you kind of like envision, like what's missing, what's necessary. And if you forget something, like as you get closer to release, it's okay because you have it in some format. Even if it's kind of crappy placeholder, at least you have it. The game is not going to be like, oh, you ended this level and the game just crashes because you forgot to do a cutscene there or something. You have the system there, so at least the game is fully playable. But I think the biggest benefit to me personally is that it leads to a very substantial mental shift where I go from we're making something from nothing to we have something and now we just need to finish it. We need to fill in the gaps. And the first, when you're creating something from nothing, it's like, if you have a blank canvas or you have like a ball of clay, it's a little scary. There's a lot of unknown. There's uncertainty. It's unpredictable. Like you get a bit of that like analysis paralysis where you could go any direction and it can be overwhelming. But once you kind of have a shape and all you're doing is massaging it into place, filling in the gaps, it gives you a clearer picture of what that thing is going to be. It feels less scary because you already have it and you're just massaging it into place. You're, making sure it is what you wanted it to be. There's not as many unknowns. It's like it exists. Now you just have to make it better. And I think that mental shift is very motivating, and it just makes it feels so exciting. I have a full game. It's missing most of the stuff and it's very, very crappy, but it's fully playable. It's a whole thing. So that's my big reason for kind of like going to that, which is also a word of caution is like always verify your sources and assets. I'm actually just about to touch on it in the next part, but it's not uncommon to have some placeholder left behind just because you forgot to upgrade it. So always make sure you have the license. If you need to cite in your credits, make sure it's always in your credits so you don't accidentally steal stuff or infringe on someone else's work. Which brings me to the next point. Prototype everything. And I've in the past actually given a more extended talk on that. But I'm a firm believer of prototyping literally everything. That doesn't mean just the game core loop or like some feature. It means everything: your art, your camera placement, your player movement, your heads-up display, your menus, your sound effects, your music, your tutorial, your teaching, your logo, marketability, your GIFs, the hook, target audience, genre, market position, because all of that stuff matters. And I don't think you can really isolate it effectively especially when you're a smaller indie developer. Like, here's an example in 2 pictures. This is exactly the same game. One is the early stages when I'm just using the typical like primitives and just some like placeholder text. And like, what is this? Like, you don't even know what's going on here. You like, if you wanted to show it to someone, you have to sit down and explain, okay, so the circle is this, the cube is this. You have to kind of read all this like not very easy to read text to even understand what everything is. But then you look at the second picture and, it's already a lot more appealing. Like, it's colorful, it's silly. You're already kind of getting a feeling like, okay, this is probably a silly, colorful game. It's not going to be a serious, grim, dark thing. You have little icons above the characters, so you can see like, oh, there's probably some kind of status thing. The UI is more inviting, so it's kind of it gives you an idea of like, are those elements working together? But it also helps you communicate the vision to other people. And here's an example from one of our games where you play as a silly cloud, you rain on people, you ruin their day. The first level is literally a wedding. So you're ruining a wedding as people are like scrambling and freaking out. And the first one is my initial prototype that I just soloed myself. Here you can see the various iterations as we kind of developing the game and experimenting with art. And the last one is what the game looks like at release. So if you look at it, you can kind of see that, it's a massive improvement, but the vibe is there. Like the DNA of the game is there from the start, like the color palette, the framing, the city kind of like style, even the cloud shape and the face is kind of similar. It also is a super useful tool when you work with other artists, because if you can show them something like, I want something like this, but just make it better. It's easier than be like, I don't know, here's a box, cube, make it into something. So I think, it helps you from the very start communicate the vibe of your game. And I think the vibe is everything in video games. Would Shadow of the Colossus be the same game if it wasn't for its like huge open spaces, towering monsters, and oppressive atmosphere? Would Yoshi's Woolly World be the same cozy, sweet game if it wasn't for like the woolly aesthetic to everything? Would Untitled Goose Game be as much fun if all the NPCs were capsules with like question marks above them indicating when you get freaked out? I think when we're prototyping, we do have to think of games as a complete package. Even audio. If you've ever booted Halo and heard the theme, you're immediately, okay, this is a grand space opera. It immediately sets you in the mood. And I think all those little pieces are important for you to really see how is my vision working together. And the great thing is that we live in an age where there's so many resources out there. Like when I was starting out 11 years ago, like Unity was still up and coming. There weren't as many like, GameFab or PlayFab. And there weren't just as many resources. It was a lot harder. You kind of have to like do your janky programmer art or pay people. But now we have so many resources out there. I constantly like buying assets, or I'm using free assets. There's a ton of stuff available that you can kind of like kit bash stuff that maybe it's not going to be your final thing, but it gets that vision across. It gets what I was showing here. Like it gives you that vibe where like, okay, this is not maybe not final, but you kind of feel the direction. And it's possible now much more easier than it used to be. So take advantage of those resources. And just as I mentioned earlier, like just pay attention to the licenses, make sure you cite them. Whenever I use an asset even as a placeholder, I put in my credits just so I can reference it later. So it's not like a mystery, like where did this file get from? But going beyond that, I think you should also start prototyping your marketing. Again, we live in an economy, like the attention economy, where people are on social media, press, and even influencer are getting more and more tricky. And people want to see the creation process. They want to see up and coming developers. So just start throwing GIFs, I've seen so many games explode because they're just constantly posting. And that also helps you evaluate ideas. Like even posting a GIF, you kind of have to think about like, well, is my target audience listening? But it does kind of show you like which of those different ideas are maybe garnering more interest. How are people responding? Are people commenting? And that also helps you validate your idea and like also steer its direction. Maybe like people like this feature more and then that. So maybe you can learn like maybe you should focus more on this feature in the game because that's what people are loving in the GIFs. And that'll make marketing easier a year from now. Same with all your store assets, your store like key art, that's when people like scroll for 100 games on Steam, your key art, it makes a big difference whether they're going to click it or not. So you can experiment with that. On Rain and Parade, like I did like a smiley face, I did like more a frowny face. I did like a little thing like try the demos because signal like, hey, there's a demo available. If you want to play a free game right now, download it here. So that's experiment with your marketing as well. Again, prototype everything as you're going along. Think of the thing as a holistic project, and it doesn't have to be perfect from the start. Again, like games are iterative. Your guidelines will change, especially once you start testing. A lot of things will change. Once you bring artists on board, they'll also have their own impact and their own vision. But just have something. I think starting out, especially mediocre vision is better than no vision. because at least you have something to pass it on to your team. You have something you can actually test. Something you can get feedback on. Like again, cubes and capsules are a lot harder to get an idea. Does this art style work for my game than having like cute, cozy aesthetic? Because maybe you'll learn that, oh, maybe that's the wrong aesthetic. And isn't it better to learn that sooner than later? Which takes me to another topic, location. So right now I've been telling you a lot about, the process, how to make it, how to, work around the creative limitations of the medium. But there's a whole other thing about being successful in indie games, is that being at the right place at the right time can make all the difference. And I've moved to Seattle. I'm originally from Poland, born and raised. I kind of moved around a bunch. And I came to Seattle a little over 8 years ago. And that was not just a whimsical, fun decision. That was a very strategic choice that had paid off very well for my career, because I was at the right place at the right time. Moving to Seattle has opened so many doors for me. I was exhibited at PAX, where I met both Xbox and Nintendo representatives, which later let me become the developers for the platforms and get dev kits. I went to Pocket Gamer, which is also another local showcase, where I met a developer, I met a publisher, who then later helped port our games to consoles and do a native Japanese launch as well. The Seattle Indies and other event called Conspire is where I met great, fantastic people, both for emotional and kind of like moral support, but also people I hired. I think Beverly is here somewhere, that, she did the art for the Crow game, and I met her through here local events. So again, that wouldn't have happened if I haven't been here. There's also a bunch of other local events. Xbox does kind of discovery days. Steam used to do dev days. I don't think, I think I went to the last one they did just after I came here. There's a bunch of other local events. The Seattle Indies Expo, I've exhibited there with my games and met press representatives, met influencers. That also kind of put us on the map of the gaming landscape as well. I think that's the one of best bang for the buck, because you get all the PAX crowd for hundredth of the cost. So definitely, I think the deadline is coming up this Sunday. Yeah. So, if you have a game, submit. There's also other events I travel to, like GDC is a big one. It's, a lot of networking with other developers. I met developers that I later would do bundling or collaboration. I've also found people I hired at those kind of events. I've also found about some sort of Discord communities that I joined, which have later proved to be very great as far as resources and knowledge sharing. And also I went to some platform related events, or bundle organizations like Humble at those kind of events. So again, being at the right place at the right time. And there's a bunch of other, I mentioned earlier, Summer Game Fest. It's coming up in a month in Los Angeles. That was pivotal to us with our last game. Game Industry Gathering is another great community of very inclusive and safe kind of space for developers to just, it's more social, but it's also a great kind of network to connect with people. DICE, East Coast Game Coast, Full Indie. There's so many other events, and going to those, it costs money, and not all of them will be useful to you depending on where you are. But it's important to realize that your success doesn't solely depend on your game. As you may realize, video games are not strictly a meritocracy. Just because you made a good game does not mean it's going to be successful. It definitely helps, and I think good game is the best marketing. But there's so many great games that just don't explode because they never had that chance, or maybe developers didn't have the right connections, or maybe some other just luck of the draw. They just didn't hit that. So I think it's important to take advantage of whatever opportunities you have. Put yourself in those places, and just remember that it's not, your game is just a part of your success. And capitalism doesn't care. And you might have noticed this by now, and this might blow some of your minds. I'm a white straight male, and that comes with certain privileges as well in this industry and all industries. And I've definitely been fortunate in that way, that I was born this way. But I think we're also entering a time where there's more and more opportunities for underrepresented communities. Black voices in gaming. They do spotlight Black creators, women-led games. Spotlight female creators, and women-led teams. Even here locally, Diversity Collective Plus is also our local here in Seattle community for LGBTQ and other underrepresented communities. So definitely, if you fall into any of those categories, take a look at them, pay attention, submit, take advantage of that. Because again, I think you have to take, if you want to be successful, you have to take advantage of any opportunity that comes your way. Don't feel bad about it. My only rule is just don't be a jerk. Don't grow to be one of those I made it, so screw you. Still be human. Take advantage of that, but not at the cost to other people. And when you can, give back. Come, once you build up, when you have a success, come back and give a talk yourself. Tell people how my system is terrible and yours is way better. Just knowledge share, give back, or sponsor events, or just carry on the torch in one way or the other. Once you get the opportunity to. But when you're still at the bottom rung of the ladder, just take every advantage you can. And moving on to kind of the last lesson, I want to talk a little bit about accessibility. Kind of falls in this theme about kind of being there for underrepresented communities. I think accessibility is something that you can incorporate in your design from the get-go, and the sooner you plan for it, the easier it gets, because there's sort of a lot of very low-hanging fruit that you can pick off without a lot of extra development time if you just plan ahead for it. So for example, a very common thing is just not relying on just colors or just text cues or just audio cues for different events happening in the game, because folks who have who are colorblind or have auditory or reading challenges, they're going to be kind of stuck. But if you have a mix of the different systems, then there's always a fallback. There's always not a way. And it also creates a better experience for your regular, non-disabled players as well, because this way, they also have more cues. They have a fuller picture of what's going on. So it's kind of a win-win, everybody wins. Something else that I like to do in my games, a lot of my recent games kind of fall into a cozy, wholesome genre. So this may not fit for everyone, but there's no really loose conditions, and I keep a lot of my objective flexible. So the system that I have is that some of the objectives that are required to beat a level, and you have to complete them to move forward. Some of them are completely optional. So I would kind of design that so some of the more challenging or more tricky ones would simply be optional. So players can kind of decide and choose their own difficulty. If they want to be a completionist, they can offer the extra ones. If not, they don't have to. And this also makes the game more accessible, because if some players are struggling with the extra objectives, they can just kind of skip them, but still keep moving forward with the game. Another thing that I do is kind of hidden dynamic difficulty scaling. So an example is we had this kind of a tower defense level that towards the very end was supposed to be the big grand battle at the end. And what I did is actually sneakily, every time you lose, the level gets about 5 to 10% easier. But it doesn't tell the player that. So, because it's a cozy game, you're not meant to it's not Dark Souls. You're not meant to keep fighting the same 100 times. And if you're making a Souls-like, then ignore this. But for us, it's if you just want to relax with your game, it kind of sucks to repeat the same level 10 times. So we don't want to also have a hey, we notice you suck at our game. Do you want to make it easier? So it's kind of a very subtle, like I said, 5 to 10%. So each time it gets a bit easier, and after 5 times, it's half as hard. But because it's so sublime, players don't realize it's getting easier, so they still have that satisfaction of I've gotten better, I've overcome this challenge, without us taking yakking their yum. And that also helps make the game more accessible. For players who might struggle with maybe mobility challenges. Demo as an accessibility feedback tool is another great way to make your game more accessible. So what we did with our last game, we released the demo. And again, going back to the idea of as soon as you have that fully playable experience, you have something you can show to the world. So you can release the demo, so you can start getting feedback early. And that helps with both marketing as well as gameplay feedback, but also accessibility feedback is great. We had players ask us to add a switch. So, some buttons you have to hold for an action to happen, and that can be difficult. So some players with mobility challenges. So they asked us, can you make it a toggle? So instead of holding it, you can just press it once to start an action and press it again to release it. So we added that function. Another thing we eventually added is also complete control remapping, which is also a really big accessibility tool. If you're using Rewired, which is the most popular kind of like input plugin for Unity, it kind of has a built-in control mapper that you can just kind of like import into your project. That can help players a lot, especially if they're using like alternate, like custom joysticks for accessibility. So that's another good one that's fairly easy to add. It's kind of wrapping up my presentation. Keep in mind, I am a sample size of 1. This is my way of doing it that I like. I mentioned like I don't like getting funding or working with a publisher because it does come with some restrictions. You have milestones you need to hit. You have to do negotiations. You may have to give up some creative control. And so I just choose to kind of like go that my own route and build my own way, which may not be your way. So this is not meant to be like be all end all. I mentioned there's so many great resources. So definitely, do your research and kind of pick and choose whatever resonates with you. Maybe none of this resonates with you, and that's okay because, now I know what not to do, and that's okay too. The indie space is diverse, it's big. There's so many developers from, single people who make game by themselves in 6 years to 30, people teams with $1 million budgets, and we all find our different ways. So there's no one way. And as I said, every year something else works. So whatever I'm telling you might not even work next year. Who knows? So just take everything I said with a grain of salt and just use it as a single data point in your journey of learning. And that about wraps it up. If any of you want to connect, here's all my information for Blue Sky or Twitter. And I want to leave some time for questions if there's any.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So kind of being like a one-man show, but also bringing more people in. How do you limit you putting your hands in too many different pots so that you don't end up kind of doing nothing and trying to do everything?
That's a good question that I'm still kind of learning how to do better. There's some parts that I'm like, definitely I just know I'm bad at. Like I can't art for crap. Like artists were usually people I usually bring on first because I just know I just can't art. And so kind of have an easy time like letting go of that because I understand like I'll never be as good as an artist. And I think same can go with, like finding like musicians or even like writing. I do my own writing, but I've also worked with other writers, and I think that was positive. So kind of having like checking your own ego a little bit, being like I come from a programming and design background, so that's my specialty, but I'm not an artist. So being just honest with yourself, and also thinking of like pragmatically, like I do hire another developer, and I could do that development myself, but it would take me twice as long. So if I hire someone, I can effectively cut my development time in half. So it's also thinking of that, like, like again, your timeline and also within your budget, what can I afford? Like starting out, I sold more of my stuff because I just didn't have money to pay people, and I don't like making people work for free because I've done it before and it sucks. And now that I'm like more established, I have bigger budget. I can also be like, okay, I can actually hire a developer now. I can hire an extra artist. So also kind of scaling that based on your needs. And yeah.
Thanks for sharing. And I have a question. So if you already have a full-time job, right, and you want to, develop a game part-time, how we can ensure that you can, because it may take 1 or 2 years, right? Especially when you are part-time and let's say you want to do something on weekends and a lot of things happen. How you can ensure that you get strong motivation to finish it rather than just stop something?
Yeah, that's tricky. Oh yeah. So the question is, when you're working a full-time job, how can you have the time and motivation to like work on the game on the side? Correct? Yeah, it's honestly that is tricky, and I definitely went through a period of being kind of a workaholic, which was not healthy. I think the best advice would be like just start small. Like don't make 100-hour RPG. Like start with a smaller project. Like I mentioned, my first game was literally a visual novel style that you can beat in like 30 minutes. So start with something smaller, and then like maybe once you're having some successes, You can start kind of building up into more and more time, and also leverage the existing tools. Like I mentioned, there's so many assets out there, so you don't have to do everything yourself. Like if you have the money, you can purchase stuff or find stuff for free that also cut down on the amount of work you need to do yourself. So yeah, starting small. It's definitely, for me, it was a lot like solo a small game, have a little money, invest in the next game so I can hire people, be more efficient, make it higher production values. That makes more money. Now I can do it even bigger, and then kind of like that snowballing thing until I'm at a point where like I actually make enough money off of this where I can just do this full time. So it's kind of just that like slow like building up. Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk about your GDC experience and how you did most of it?
Sure. So the question is talking about my GDC experience and how to make most of it. I think that's also another interesting thing that I could probably do a whole other talk about, where I've gone to like several GDCs over the past like 11 years, and each one was different. When I was starting out, I was like the bumbling fool who I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where all the parties were. And then like this time when I go there, like I went this year, and I was like, I'm not looking for publisher. I'm not looking for funding. So it's like, it's a very different vibe. So that kind of depends, honestly, where you are in your journey, and like kind of asking yourself, like, what do I want to go? What am I getting out of it? Like, are you looking to hire people? Are you looking to find a publisher? Are you looking to connect with platform holders? Are you looking to maybe just network with other developers? Or maybe you're just looking there for fun and having motivation. That's also like, for me, a big reason for like even doing this talk. Like I get so re-energized by this because I feel like I'm part of this ecosystem. So I think asking yourself that and kind of working backwards. Okay, so I want to meet, let's say, publishers. So maybe look for the meet to match or like their own networking platform. Like see who our publishers are going. Shoot them message early on and be like, hey, I would love to connect. See if there's networking like roundtables or something, and kind of like work backwards from your goal. What is your specific goal like when you go to GDC? Oh, you've never been. So probably, yeah. So that's going, like if you were going to go, like why would you go?
Mostly networking, I'd say.
Okay, with like publishers or other developers?
Other developers.
Okay, so the person is saying that they haven't been to GDC and they would probably go to do some networking with other developers. Then I would say, look, there's, I think Ty Taylor from here, Seattle, NBC, runs a website called like GDC Parties or something. There's basically a giant spreadsheet of every party. So just look at that, look at it over social, and just go to a bunch of those. Also, hanging around the big Yerba Buena garden is great because a lot of people just hang out. It's like a big open space, and you can like people tend to be really friendly. You can just usually walk up and be like, hey, I'm looking to meet some people. There's a lot of like IGDA organizes a bunch of like special interest groups. There's like different meetups. Like I went to like a narrative meetup. And I found that, through the big spreadsheet of like GDC parties. So I was like, hey, I like writing too. So I went there and I met a bunch of writers. So if you want to network, like a lot of specialty like groups will be there. So you can like pick and choose. And the cool trick is like you can actually go without a pass at all. I did that like not this year, but last year. I just didn't buy an expo hall pass because I didn't care to. And I just hung around the area. I went to some of the side events. I hung around the garden, and you just save yourself $1,000. Okay. Yes.
So that spreadsheet you showed earlier, comparing different genres, dead time, cost, marketability, etc. What kinds of things do you build up that sort of knowledge base, and how much time do you spend on that?
So the question is about showing the spreadsheet about analyzing different projects as far as like cost, marketability, target audience. And the question is, how did I build that? How much time I put into it? How do I know how to fill that in? Correct. I think that goes a little bit to experience where, again, I've been just in industry for a while. I keep tab on the trends. So there's some stuff that I'm just, just following the different, like how to market a game discovery, tracking, like being part of like I'm in a cozy game Discord. I'm like in a marketing Discord. I'm in the Seattle Indies Discord. Also kind of just paying attention to like, YouTube channels, press, what are they covering? What are other showcase, like something that's very important is also like the Summer Game Fest. What are games are getting spotlit? What kind of like quality their trailers are? Like that's also good to know. Like if you ever submit a trailer to a show, just see what last year's trailer looked like, so you kind of know the bar is there. And something you can also do is after a show happens, to look at all the games, go to their Steam pages, check their Steam DBs, and just see how much their follower graphs jumped up. And that also kind of gives you an idea, like both how effective this show is, but also like, oh, this kind of cozy game, like usually cozy games will jump less than like a Souls-like or a strategy game. And that also kind of informs you about like how the current trends are, where the current trends are going. So it's a lot of kind of like keeping tab on like what's going on in the industry. As far as marketability goes, what's kind of viral, what's popular, what kind of like which showcases are having an impact, which ones aren't. And as far as like stuff like development cost and timeline and like target audience, that I think goes a little bit more to the experience. You kind of just have to go through the motions. That could be a whole other, like how do you hire people and how do you budget, and you know that's a whole other kind of worms. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, most part. You mentioned the Steam stacks. Is there like a specific site you use for that?
Yeah, it's called. The question is, what is the site that I use for analyzing Steam? So it's called SteamDB. And I forget, it might be, is it .org or .com? It's huh? Yeah, if you just Google SteamDB, like Steam database, you're gonna find it, and it's a great website that has like so much information that like tracks price changes, it tracks the follower graph, which is kind of like a proxy for wish list, which is kind of a proxy for like how much hype this game has. So it's a fantastic, like you can also search game by genre, you can compare two different games. It's like a fantastic tool for basically like keeping tabs on Steam releases. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you've gotten dev kits for your games in the past from Xbox or Microsoft and Nintendo. Do you do that simply just by like word of mouth networking, or is it more like setting up a meeting with them, or how does that work?
So the question is, how did I get dev kits for like working on Nintendo and Xbox? So to my understanding, that it works a bit different nowadays, but back when I was starting out, it was a little bit exclusive. So it was a lot of like networking and going back to the idea of like being at the right place at the right time. I came to Seattle and I made some connections, and I actually met 3 different Nintendo representatives before I emailed Nintendo about like, hey, we would love to bring our game to your thing. So I think that kind of having that in helped a lot. From my understanding, I think there's a more formal process now. I think you can actually like there's some kind of a form or something. I'm honestly not sure because it was years ago now that I actually kind of became their partner developers. But from what I understand, there's a more formal process, and I think some of them may ask for like game design documents, like pitch documents. They must, like you might have to fill a whole form. That's my understanding how it works right now.
So steamdb.info actually.
Steamdb.info, yeah, that's the website. Yeah, I think you had a question?
Yeah. Can you talk more about like finding people to hire or what that process looks like? Like, do you mostly I know you mentioned meeting people about like GDC, but you also ever like cold call artists that you find online and like, be like, hey, do you want to work for me? And like, give you contracts, pay for asset. Like, how does that whole process work?
So the question is, how do I go about finding people and the process of hiring people for my team goes? The answer is all of the above. So one other website I'll mention is it's called Working with Indies. And it's a great website that I had like a lot of success. And it's basically like a job board geared towards more independent teams. So I had like a lot of success with that site, getting a lot of like quality candidates. I've also met people just through networking events, both here and at GDC. And I've also done what you mentioned, where like I will, like if I don't have anyone like immediately, like even before I put a job posting, I'll literally just scroll like ArtStation. I look for art that looks like what I want, and I'll just email the artist, be like, hey, you have art that I'm kind of looking for that style. Would you be interested in a job, like a freelance work for like a few months or something? And I've hired people this way as well. So it kind of like depends. I think usually, I like to like do my own little bit of a search. Then if I'm not finding something exact, I'll also post in like the job postings. Or if I just bump into someone at an event, like a lot of my like local hiring was just like chance encounters. I just met someone and be like, oh, you do 3D cube modeling. I need a cute 3D modeler. Perfect. That worked out. And I do like working somewhere locally because it's kind of nicer. Like you can actually meet face to face. But sometimes it doesn't work like that. One thing that I'll say, do not post on Twitter. I did that once and I got immediately spammed by like 200 bots emailing me with like the anime profile pictures. Terrible. Yeah, don't do that.
How about LinkedIn?
I've question is, how about LinkedIn? I did not have good success with LinkedIn because I think LinkedIn is a little bit more geared toward enterprise. So I got a lot of kind of like people who had no experience in games, but are just get general like software development, which is fine if you're willing to like take a chance. But for me, like I usually want someone who has like prior like Unity experience. So that's a little bit harder. Like, I don't know, maybe it's better now, but I've never found LinkedIn to be very useful, to be honest. Like I forget to check it. Honestly, I use Twitter and now Blue Sky is kind of my LinkedIn, or like that's a platform I use for like networking with other developers, getting in front of like press and influencers. But LinkedIn itself, like I think maybe in like more AAA, it's useful, but I have not had a lot of success with it.
There's a bunch of questions in the online chat too.
Yeah, do you want to shoot?
Sure. Adam Simpson says, what kind of games do you like to play? And do you make the kind of games that you like to play?
Should I repeat the question? Yeah, what games do I like to play, and what do I make the games that I want to play? I'm kind of like all over the place. I've been playing, I think my last favorite game was like Ghostwire Tokyo, which I did not expect to like as much as I did, but it just really sucked me in. I kind of like adventure, I like story games, I like RPGs. When I was younger, I used to like a lot of like online shooters, like back in like Counter-Strike, Day of Defeat days, but I kind of moved away from that. So it kind of varies. I feel like I go through phases. A lot more indie games these days as well. As far as like, do I like the games that I make? I don't know why. It's a weird thing. Maybe it's because by the time I finish it, I kind of hate it because I just played it to death and I'm like, get this away from me. But I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of elements, but I don't know. That's a tricky question. Like I think that the relation between an artist and his art is always a little bit weird. Yeah. Another question?
Yeah. At what point in your life did you make the decision to like go into game development? I can't remember if you covered that already.
Not yet. Yeah. So at one point did I decide I want to be a game developer? I think that's something that I kind of knew from the start. I knew when I was a little kid, I would be like, back when games actually came with like editors, I spend more time playing around with editors. Like the StarCraft map editor, I spend more time playing with that than actually playing StarCraft. I made like a whole like pseudo RPG campaign with like recurring characters and like storyline. And I think that was my cue. Like, yeah, I'm gonna be a developer one day. So yeah, I was just a nerd, and I also love games as a creative art form because it's the only one that's truly interactive. I feel like movies can show you something, and music or a poem can make you feel something, but I think games can make you do something. And I think that's a very powerful ability. And I didn't touch on this talk, but I've also made some social commentary, social impact games before, focusing on like media literacy, media bias, fake news. And that's like another passion that it's a topic I personally care about a lot. And I think games being an interactive medium are a powerful way to make people kind of reflect on those topics and face their own biases. So I kind of like also games as like sort of like educational, like a social impact tool. So that's also like a second reason why I kind of realize I like games.
One last one. What do you think indie games can do to be fun and competitive with other indies or AAA games?
I think having the smaller scale and scope, and also the innovative edge. A lot of innovation comes from indie games, and then sometimes you'll see a lot of AAA kind of following those trends. But also being like smaller and scrappier, I think we can also get away with a lot of smaller and scrappier stuff. Like imagine if the next Assassin's Creed was a 3-hour game, like they would get torn to shreds and reviews. But us indies, we can make a 3-hour game that's $15 to $20, and people are gonna be like, this is great, I'll recommend it to all my friends. So I think we can get away with like much smaller scope and much tighter scope, and also being a little bit more, especially if you're releasing smaller games more frequently, you can be a bit more risky. You can try something more unique. If you're spending, 6 years on a AAA game, you're going to be a lot more risk averse because that's 6 years down the drain. But if you only spend like a few months on a game, you can make something really, really crazy. And if it doesn't take off, like you only lost a few months of your time. So I think, yeah, getting away with smaller scope and having more room for experimentation are probably our biggest advantages as an indie.
So,
Yeah. One more question?
Yeah, can
Sure.
Do you-
Yeah, so I noticed that your first game is a visual novel game, right? Visual novel game.
Mhm.
one last time.
Yes.
And you never make visual game again. So why?
So the question is that one of my first games was a visual novel game, and then
Right.
yes, why did I stop making them? That's actually not very true. My next several games were actually very like heavily story driven. My second game was kind of like a first person immersive sim that was also very dialogue heavy. And then my next two games called Headliner and Headliner NoviNews were kind of like a mix between a visual novel, a point and click adventure, and kind of like papers, please mechanic. So I actually did do a lot of narrative work. I did actually move away from that for two reasons. One, those are very like kind of like social impact games, and they were focused on like like fake news and media, and like I was basically following a lot of like media. I was watching CNN and Fox News and Reddit and Facebook groups, kind of doing research. I even flew to like a journalism conference in Boston, and I just got really burned out because, as you all know, following the politics, it kind of kills you a little bit. So it's like I need a palate cleanser. So that's why I kind of moved towards I want something colorful and dumb, and that's kind of when I pivoted to a game about like, what about a cloud raining on people? What about a crow that poops? So that's kind of why I moved towards that direction. And the second reason, it is really hard to get someone at like a busy, dark, loud, packed show floor and be like, hey, read a wall of text for 15 minutes. So marketing those games is very, very difficult as well. And something that I can just like, hey, here's a controller. Within 5 seconds, you're having fun. Like that's also goes back to the marketability. So those kind of like both personal and a little bit of the like marketing reason. Yeah. All right, I think that's time.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all very much for coming. Hope you got something out of this.